The Greek landscape is conspicuous not only for its beauty, but also for its complexity and variety. A quarter of Greece is mountain terrain, much of it deeply dissected. In central Greece, in the northwestern part of Thessaly, between northeast of Hasia and west of Pindos, where the plain of Thessaly ends, gigantic rocks rise up that create a spectacle which might be unique worldwide. The two local villages near the Meteora are called Kalambaka and Kastraki. The landscape and the cities are full of silence and solitude that's broken only by birds flying and the pealing of the monastery bells. For many centuries this heavenly silence has coexisted with the upward-reaching grey rocks. The Meteora are enormous residual masses of sandstone and conglomerate, which appeared through fluvial erosion during the Tertiary period. Seismic activity increased the number of fault lines and fissures and hewed the shapeless masses into individual sheer rock columns. The rocks are up to 600 meters above sea level. The monasteries of Meteora, built upon these rocks, offer one of the world's most spectacular sacred sites. Meteora captures the imagination on so many levels, natural, religious and cultural. In a region of almost inaccessible sandstone peaks, Orthodox monks settled on these columns in the sky from the 11th century onwards. This place at the top of the highest rocks, between heaven and earth, has been chosen by many hermits to live and be closer to God for the rest of their lives. They renounced worldly goods and devoted themselves to prayers and spiritual concentration. According to experts, the first hermits must have taken refuge in these rocks sometime around the end of the first millennium. The earliest Christians appear to have lived as hermits with a solitary existence or in separate communities. Early Christian monasticism developed out of asceticism. Hermits have the practice of renunciation of the comforts of society and a life of austere self-discipline and self-denial. The hermits lived in hollows and fissures in the rock towers, some of which reach 550 meters in elevation above the plain. This great height, combined with the sheerness of the cliff walls, kept away all but the most determined visitors. The hermits were initially isolated, praying in small chapels called prosephadia, a Greek word simply meaning places of prayer, seeking their own salvation and that of all peoples. Their life was simple and the work laborious. Exactly when the rocks began to be inhabited is not known, since existing documents date from the period when the monasteries were already organized. In the cavities, fissures and peaks of the rocks, local people found protection from the raids of the various conquerors and armies that passed through the area. For example, around the 14th and 15th century, the cavities were a way to get shelter from the Ottoman invasion. Monks who lived in caves within the rocks during the 11th century originally settled the area. But as the times became more unsure during the time of Turkish occupation, brigandry and lawlessness, they climbed higher and higher up the rock face until they were living on the inaccessible peaks, where they were able to build by bringing material and people up with ladders and baskets, and build the first monasteries. Meteora is characterized by its 24 churches, placed on the facade or on the top of huge rock formations, which in the past made them almost inaccessible. The impression is that the unique landscape of Meteora was created when the Earth began to play games with land and sky. For visitors, the anchoring force of gravity becomes a physical reality when the gaze beholds rocks that reach for the sky as if pushed from within. The Meteora rocks look as if they were pushed by giant fingers from deep within the Earth to stand straight up from the land around them. A visual feast for the soul, connecting the underground, the earth and the sky in such a majestic way that it's not by accident that it was chosen as a major place of worship for monks and nuns who found a place which was closer to the universe. These monks found atop the suspended rocks a place of meditation seemingly created by metaphysical forces, the kind of forces that Earth forges over millions of years. Meteora captures one's interest on so many levels, it's impossible to focus only on one aspect, no matter how imposing it might be. In this place, geoforming has been amalgamating with the spiritual quest of humans for many centuries. Monasteries occupy many of the rocky terraces, most of which were built during the Byzantine era and have changed little over the centuries. They're the dwellings of monks who found in Meteora a sanctuary that isolates them from everyday life, a protected refuge from danger, and above all, a vehicle that delivers one closer to the heavens. The monastery of the Holy Trinity, founded by the monk Domitius in the 15th century, is probably the most dramatically positioned of the Meteora monasteries. Perched atop a slender pinnacle and accessible only by 140 steep steps, its isolated position makes it one of the most peaceful monasteries as well. The Meteora provide an astounding example of the types of monastic construction which illustrate a significant stage in history, that of the 14th and 15th centuries, when the Hermetic ideals of early Christianity were restored to a place of honor by monastic communities, both in the Western world and in the Orthodox Church. The Rusanu Monastery stands on a low rock. The monastery covers the entire surface of the rock. The monasteries represent a unique example of monastic life against the backdrop of superlative natural phenomena since the 14th century. The Holy Monastery of Varlam is a male monastery which was named after a monk called Varlam, who lived in a closed cave as a hermit in the 14th century and built a tiny chapel on top of a huge rock. The monastery can be accessed by a narrow bridge that runs from the main road and a series of 195 stairs. The fathers of Meteora did not set out to create a civilization on the inhospitable rocks. Rather, the civilization grew as a natural consequence of their love of God. Thus, their hard work, self-sacrifice, spirituality and aesthetics have endowed the monasteries of the Meteora with exceptional architectonic beauty, masterly frescoes, splendid gold embroideries, and other artistic treasures. The monastery houses an important collection of relics and other ecclesiastical treasures. The tower contains the old windlass and rope basket from the early 16th century, which used to transport monks and supplies to the monastery. When asked how often the rope was replaced, a 19th century abbot famously replied, "Only when it breaks." The net in which intrepid pilgrims were hoisted up vertically alongside the 373-meter cliff where the Varlam monastery dominated the valley symbolizes the fragility of a traditional way of life that's threatened with extinction. The late Byzantine church of Varlam has a cross-in-square plan with a west narthex, with a dome in each section. Suspended in the air, these monasteries represent a unique artistic achievement and are one of the most forceful examples of the architectural transformation of a site into a place of retreat, meditation and prayer. The tradition of the Church is expressed not only through words, not only through the actions and gestures used in worship, but also through art, through the line and colour of the holy icons. Through icons, the Orthodox Christian receives a vision of the spiritual world. Because the icon is part of tradition, icon painters aren't free to adapt their own aesthetic sentiments, but the mind of the Church. Meteora is not just a mass of rocks, but the shapes and the space that are woven around them. Meteora is the agent that makes us aware of incredible natural processes, of what's below the Earth's surface, of time and the sky above. It's that rare moment where time becomes eternal, and where a human can feel simultaneously so small and so great, so much of the earth and so much of the sky.